Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Ready for today's dose of
Well,
news?
let's dive in.
Awesome. Today we're tackling Trump's tariffs and trying to figure out what they mean for, well, everything.
It's a big one for sure. You guys sent in a ton of articles, and it seems like every corner of the world is feeling the effects.
Right. I mean, we're seeing tariffs slapped on Canada, Mexico, and China.
25% for our North American neighbors and 10% on goods from China.
It's a lot to unpack, especially since these tariffs were supposed to go live on February 4th.
Things have already gotten a little messy, though, haven't they?
For sure. The Mexican tariffs are on pause for a month after that agreement on border troop deployments.
Doesn't mean everyone's relaxed, though.
No way. The markets are freaking out a bit, and honestly, I don't blame them.
91% of S&P 500 stocks took a hit right out of the gate.
Ouch.
Investors are definitely spooked. Even Goldman Sachs is pointing out specific sectors and companies that are looking extra vulnerable to this whole tariff storm.
Yeah, it's a real nail-biter,
Yeah,
especially for anyone who's got their retirement savings tied up in the market.
that's a big concern.
But you know what's interesting? There are always exceptions. Like, look at Tyson Foods. Their stock actually went up.
After they just blew past earnings expectations.
Exactly.
They called it exceptional chicken results. Really goes to show you that even in a crazy market like this, some companies can still come out on top.
Absolutely. And it's not just individual companies. We've got big players like JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley with completely different takes on this whole thing.
Total opposites.
Right. JP Morgan's not mincing words. They're basically questioning whether the Trump administration is actually as business-friendly as they claim to be.
They're concerned that if these tariffs stick around, businesses are going to get hit hard with increased costs and all sorts of disruptions.
Makes sense.
On the other hand, Morgan Stanley's saying, hey, there might be a silver lining here.
Oh.
They think some companies could actually benefit from the tariffs, specifically those with strong pricing power, especially in sectors that focus on goods.
Interesting. So some potential winners and losers emerging from this trade war.
For sure.
Okay, what about the bond market? Any clues there?
It's a mixed bag. Short-term yields are up, long-term yields are down, what we call a flattening yield curve.
So what's that telling us?
Basically, investors are unsure about the short-term economic outlook. They're hesitant.
Can't say I blame them. Everyone's just holding their breath to see what happens next.
Exactly.
Speaking of holding their breath, Bitcoin investors had a wild ride. It plunged at first when investors started ditching risk assets, but then it shot back up to $98,000.
Right after news broke about the Mexican tariff delay.
Crazy, Ray.
Bitcoin's always been a bit of a roller coaster, but this really shows how sensitive it is to these global events. I mean, news in Washington, D.C. can instantly rock the crypto world.
Talk about interconnectedness.
It's a volatile world out there.
It is. And it's not just the markets that are on edge. We've got the Institute for Supply Management, ISM, saying these tariffs could seriously hurt the manufacturing recovery.
They track manufacturing activity, so their opinion carries weight.
Big time. What are they saying exactly?
They're worried that the tariffs are creating this cloud of uncertainty, which is making manufacturers hesitant to invest and hire.
But hadn't businesses been optimistic about the Trump administration?
They were expecting a business-friendly environment. Now this sudden policy change has totally thrown them off.
It's like hitting the brakes just as things were starting to pick up speed.
Exactly.
And we're seeing the effects in other areas too, like energy. Oil and gasoline futures have jumped up because people are worried about U.S. crude imports.
These tariffs are creating a chain reaction across a whole bunch of industries. It's like a domino effect.
One policy decision can touch so many things.
It's crazy.
It really is. And while some people are predicting total disaster, others are seeing opportunity in all this.
There's always another side to the coin, right?
We've got an article here from MarketWatch highlighting specific companies that might actually benefit from the tariffs.
It's called From Beer to Consumer Products, These Names Could Benefit from Trump's Tariffs. Basically, they're saying that tariffs make imported goods more expensive, which can give domestic producers a leg up.
So there will be winners and losers in this trade war.
Definitely.
Speaking of winners and losers, we can't ignore the global politics of all of this. Even Putin weighed in, suggesting Europe might stand at the feet of the master because of the friction Trump's tariffs are causing with U.S. allies.
He's not holding back.
No, he is not.
These tariffs are changing the whole global landscape. Alliances are being tested and trade relationships are being redefined. It could shift the balance of power globally.
It's a big deal. So we've got market turmoil, economic uncertainty, and geopolitical tensions all brewing at once. It's overwhelming.
It is.
But before we spiral, let's bring it back to our listeners. How is all of this affecting you guys?
That's the question everyone's asking. Stocks are down, prices are going up, and it's totally natural to be worried about your personal finances.
Right.
Luckily, you included some articles that address those worries head on. There's one from MarketWatch with advice on how to protect your retirement savings during all this craziness.
That's good to hear. It's easy to feel helpless when the economy's going haywire, but there are things you can do to protect yourself.
Absolutely. We'll get into those strategies in the next part of our deep dive. But before we move on, let's circle back to that breaking news about the Mexican tariffs.
Oh yeah, those are on hold for a month after Mexico agreed to send 10,000 troops to the border.
Right, and that caused the stock market to recover a little bit. The Dow was only down 100 points.
So a little bit of good news, but I feel like there's a but coming.
Yeah, this pause is just temporary. The root of the problem hasn't gone away.
Makes sense.
And while the U.S. and Mexico have a deal, Canada isn't so optimistic about getting the same treatment.
So the story's not over yet.
No, it's not. This is a complex situation that's changing all the time, and there are no easy answers.
But we're here to help you make sense of it all.
We'll keep an eye on things and give you the information you need to stay ahead of the curve. Let's get into those personal finance tips we mentioned earlier. People are probably a little stressed about their savings with all this market craziness.
Yeah, let's talk about that. You mentioned an article from MarketWatch about protecting your retirement accounts. What's the main takeaway there?
The biggest thing is don't panic. It's easy to freak out when the market dips, but you gotta remember it's all part of investing for the long haul.
So riding out the storm is usually the best move?
Exactly. Unless something's drastically changed in your financial situation, sticking to your long-term plan is usually the smartest move.
Makes sense.
They also talk about revisiting your asset allocation, making sure you're not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Diversification.
Right. Now might be a good time to think about your risk tolerance and make sure your portfolio still lines up with your goals.
And since we're talking about adjusting to this new reality, should we be bracing ourselves for price hikes? Like, are groceries and stuff going to get more expensive because of these tariffs?
It's a legitimate concern. There's a CNBC article called "Here's What Could Get More Expensive Under Trump's Tariffs." And it basically says, yeah, expect to see price increases on a whole bunch of stuff. Cars, clothing, you name it.
So maybe skip that shopping spree for now. What about entertainment? Could these tariffs hit Hollywood too?
Funny you should ask. There's a CNBC article that dives into that exact possibility.
No way.
Yeah, it suggests that Trump's tariffs could mess with Hollywood production and slow down the box office recovery. Apparently, it could even impact the relationship between Hollywood and Canada.
Wow, so even our movie nights are at stake.
It really shows you how far-reaching these things can be.
Definitely. And while we're talking about far-reaching consequences, there's a lot more going on beyond the tariffs themselves.
Oh, yeah, the news cycle never sleeps.
Elon Musk just dropped a bombshell. He and Trump are shutting down U.S. aid. That's huge.
It is. USAID has been around for decades, providing aid all over the world. This is a major shift, and it raises a lot of questions about where U.S. foreign policy is headed.
And then we have Trump doing a total 180 on the Fed. After all that criticism, he actually praised their decision to hold interest rates steady. What's going on there?
I think he's starting to see that more rate hikes could be risky, especially with all this trade tension going on. It seems like he's taking a more cautious approach to keep things from getting too out of control.
So trying to rock the boat and steady it at the same time?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance. He's got to consider both the economic and political implications of every move he makes.
Right. And speaking of priorities, Trump also pledged to protect Social Security, Medicare, and now Medicaid too. That's a big deal, especially with healthcare costs being such a hot topic right now.
It is. This is a huge promise, and it'll be interesting to see how he plans to follow through, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
For sure. Campaign promises are one thing, actually getting stuff done is another. Oh, and speaking of stuff that raises eyebrows, student loan debt has actually grown under Biden, even with all those historic forgiveness measures.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it shows how complicated the student loan situation really is. Some people got relief, but the root causes of the problem are still there. High college costs, a tough job market for grads,
So forgiveness was a step in the right direction, but not a total solution.
Right. We need to address the underlying issues. College affordability, job readiness, and responsible lending.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. Market craziness, potential price hikes, major policy changes, the works. It's a lot to digest.
It is. But here's the main thing to remember. Stay informed.
Yeah.
That's your best defense against all the uncertainty.
So keep listening to the deep dive.
Exactly. And don't freak out and make rash decisions, especially with your money. Take a step back, think things through, and make informed choices. We're all in this together.
And we're here to help you make sense of it all. We'll keep digging into this and give you the insights you need to navigate these crazy times. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore potential scenarios and give you some final thoughts on what's next. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this whole Trump tariff saga. It's been a wild ride for sure. Markets are on edge, politicians are making moves, and the economists are trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
It's been a whirlwind. But now that we've got a handle on what's happened, let's talk about what it all means. For our listeners, for the world, the big picture.
Right. Let's try to make some sense of this. Where do you see this all heading? Any predictions or possible scenarios that come to mind?
Well, predicting the future is always tricky, especially in a situation like this where things are changing so fast. But based on what we've seen, a few scenarios seem pretty likely. One possibility is that these tariffs could kick off a full-blown trade war, with all the countries involved hitting back with their own retaliatory measures.
Nobody wants to see that happen. What would be the consequences of a trade war?
It would be a mess. Global supply chains would get disrupted, leading to shortages and delays. Prices for everything would go up for consumers, groceries, electronics, you name it. And on a larger scale, it could even trigger a recession both in the U.S. and globally.
So a lot of potential downsides. And it's not just about the economics, right? There are political implications too.
Oh, absolutely. A trade war would definitely put a strain on international relations and could even lead to geopolitical conflicts. It's a reminder that economic decisions have consequences that go way beyond just money.
Okay, so trade war is a scenario we definitely want to avoid. Is there a more optimistic outlook? Could these tariffs actually work the way they're intended?
It's possible, but there's a lot of debate among economists about how likely that is. The goal of these tariffs is to protect American jobs and industries and to reduce the trade deficit.
The idea being to make American-made stuff more competitive by making foreign goods more expensive. But does that actually play out in the real world?
That's the big question. Some analysts say tariffs can work to protect certain industries, at least in the short term, but others say they often backfire, leading to higher prices for consumers and slower economic growth.
So there's no easy answer.
Nope. It's a complicated situation with a lot of factors at play and a lot of potential pitfalls. And it's not just about numbers and theories. It's about real people and how this is all affecting their lives.
Right. So we've got the possibility of a trade war on one hand and the chance that these tariffs could achieve some economic goals on the other. Any other scenarios we should be thinking about?
There's another possibility. Maybe these tariffs are more of a negotiating tactic, a way for Trump to put pressure on other countries and get them to make concessions. If that's the case, the tariffs might only be temporarily lifted once certain agreements are reached.
So it's all part of a bigger strategy, a high-stakes game of international chess.
Maybe. But even if they're temporary, these tariffs have already caused a lot of uncertainty and volatility in the markets. The impact is real no matter what happens in the long run.
Okay, so a lot of unknowns still. But let's bring it back to our listeners. What can people do to protect themselves financially with all this uncertainty going on?
Don't panic. That's the most important thing. Don't make any rash decisions based on fear or speculation. Take a deep breath and look at your situation. See if your investment portfolio still makes sense for your risk tolerance and your long-term goals.
So if you're in it for the long game, don't abandon ship just because there's a storm.
Right. Stay the course unless your personal circumstances have changed significantly. And don't forget about diversification. Spreading your investments across different asset classes can help reduce your risk.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Any other words of wisdom as we navigate these uncertain times?
Focus on what you can control. Look at your budget and see where you can cut back on spending. Maybe explore ways to boost your income. And most importantly, stay informed. Knowledge is power, especially in a situation like this. Find trustworthy sources of information and don't be afraid to talk to a financial advisor if you need help.
That's great advice. Thanks for breaking all of this down for us. I think you've given our listeners a really clear understanding of this complex situation and some concrete steps they can take to protect themselves.
You're welcome. It's been great diving deep into this topic with you.
And a huge thank you to all of you for joining us on this deep dive. We're here to help you make sense of the news and figure out this crazy world we live in. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.